Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to bringing you scary stories. As always, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel a lot and helps me keep creating this content. Alright, here's the stories. Late at night, I usually go to the bathroom multiple times, but for the past 4 days, every time I go to leave, I can see myself standing in the mirror from the corner of my eye. It is like the other me watching me leave the bathroom. It terrifies me to the point where I almost run out of the bathroom without looking directly at the mirror. I've never told my husband about it because I didn't want to acknowledge it out loud. Earlier today, I took a nap in bed while he sat in the chair next to it, watching TV. When I woke up, he told me he had seen me sit up and crawl backwards from the edge of the bed, stand up in front of our bedroom door from the corner of his eye. He thought it was weird that I would get up like that because I'm in the last month of my pregnancy and I can't really move very well without it hurting, so he tried talking to me. When I didn't answer, he looked at the door to find me not there and still sleeping in bed. I got really creeped out and I finally told him about what I'd been seeing in the bathroom. He thought it was creepy but didn't really want to talk about it because he didn't want it to happen anymore. I have no idea what it was or why we saw it. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Etal, Germany in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double bed on the second floor, and my sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a small single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. We went to check into our rooms, and as soon as I entered the hallway to our rooms, I almost remember feeling as though I walked into the wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, passed it off as an overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I was the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when about 2 in the morning, I'm woken up by something ripping the covers off me, and I'm jerked out of bed 2 feet towards the end of my bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into our room, because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness, like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped the light on, only to see nothing was there. The window was locked from the inside, and there was no one in the closet or bathroom, and my room was still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night scared, playing Cooking Mama on my DS. The next morning we were at breakfast, and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room, but when she turned the light on, no one was there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience, and we checked out later that day, so I didn't get to any other experiences, but it still freaks me out to this day. One night, as I was maybe 10 or 12, I had trouble falling asleep. My bedroom was the entire top floor of our house, with my bed and such being on the left side, and storage closets and a play area on the right. I was lying in bed when I heard a noise from the other side of the room and saw a rocking horse begin to rock. I was just sitting outside one of the storage closet doors. It proceeded to rock itself halfway across the room and stopped dead under the ceiling light. At this point, I was freaking out, and I had just buried my head under my blankets and never peeked out again until morning. When I woke up, the rocking horse was still in the middle of the room. Furthermore, I got a stern reprimand from my parents for being up, out of bed, playing with my toys well past bedtime. Their bedroom was directly below the storage closet play area, and I heard creaking and shuffling across the room. When I was a teenager, I used to babysit my cousin Alyssa. She was little, maybe almost 2, maybe a little older, old enough to say sentences. I'm giving her a bath before bed, and she looks out to the hallway and gets this terrified look on her face and starts crying. At this moment, my aunt's dog starts going nuts as well, barking and growling in the hallway. The atmosphere in the room became uncomfortable, and I started getting scared. I took her downstairs from the 3rd floor in the townhouse and tried to calm her down. I asked her what was wrong, and she said something along the lines of, "The man with the black eyes was there." When I continued to pry, she looked up at the 2nd floor stairs, her eyes getting big, and she looks at me, bringing her finger to her mouth and says, "Shh," while shaking her head. No. Whatever she saw, I never saw it. I lived in this house with a basement, and every time I walked up the stairs, I would get this weird, creepy goosebumps feeling on the back of my neck. It didn't make me so uneasy to go down the stairs or to be in the basement. My craft room is down there, and I spent a lot of time down there. It was just going up the stairs where I felt creepy. After a while, I would have items that I was using disappear when I would look away from them. I would search and search, and one day I got frustrated, and to no one in particular I said, "Arg! Can I please have my scissors back?" I had just looked under a pile of new mail when I turned my head, and there were my scissors on top of the mail. I talked to my neighbor, and she told me that the original owner of the house was a jolly old man who loved to prank people, and that he had fallen coming up the stairs one day and died. I think the goosebumps were him trying to tell me to be careful, and every time after that, when something would disappear, I would politely ask for it back, and it would appear in a place that I would have not missed it before. Thanks, old man. My daughter was 4 years old when we had lived in our last home. I was a single mom at the time, so it was just she and I alone in the home. I always got an uncomfortable feeling in the room, particularly in the closet area, but never thought much of it. Until one evening, I had to put her to bed, and I was doing chores. I walked by her room and heard whispering. I listened for a bit, thinking she was just talking to herself, but it was definitely a two-way conversation with her saying, "Uh-huh, okay," stuff like that. I walked in and asked her who she was talking to. She smiled uncomfortably and said, "No one." I took her out into the hall, and she wouldn't say anything about it, but I could tell she was afraid. Finally, we went outside the house. She said there was a man in her room who didn't want us in the house and told her to tell her mom to leave. I moved out a month later. She has not since ever had an episode like this. One day when my daughter was 2, we were having a typical terrible twos moment. She was throwing a bit of a tantrum for about 10 minutes and we couldn't get her under control. At some point she rather suddenly stopped and started staring at the wall. She then started lightly giggling. It was weird. One second she's crying and screaming, and the next she's smiling and happy. Then she starts saying, "Funny lady," over and over. We asked her who she saw, and she pointed to the wall again and said, "The funny lady." When we asked her to describe what she saw, she described my deceased grandmother. I mean, exactly described her. She had never met her, and I don't think she ever had even seen a picture. Not that that 2-year-old could remember a picture. I'm not much of a believer in the paranormal, but I know for sure that my daughter's got a chance to meet my mom, and that makes me happy. When I told this story to my parents, they didn't seem as shocked as I was. When I tried to get a response from them, they looked at me and said, "I guess you don't remember that you met your deceased grandfather when you were 3. The same thing happened to you 30 years ago." I'd been on the phone with my then boyfriend, and he said something that wasn't nice to me. I remember telling him that if he knew anything about me, he knew exactly where I wanted to go. I hung up the phone and got in my car. I drove to the park. The sun was kind of down below the tree line, but it wasn't dark yet, and I pulled into the parking lot. I thought it was weird that there was 2 cars pulled side by side and talking to each other. When I got out, the guy in the truck just stared at me in a horrible way. You know, when someone just looks at you like they're going to walk through you as if you don't exist. I thought, well, this is weird. It's late and no one is ever here. And then I thought, whatever, they're leaving. I don't care. I have my own problems. I only took my keys with me because I didn't want a big purse banging around. I headed across the field, which you have to cut through to get to the woods because there's no trail. I was taking my time and calming down. And then I realized it got really quiet. I didn't hear the birds and squirrels anymore. I just heard something really big moving through the woods. I thought to myself, maybe it's a dog, and then I heard the voices. The first voice was the male voice, and he said, "I know, I saw her go in this way. She couldn't have gotten that far." Then the second voice comes in, it's quieter, and says, "Shh, she'll hear you." Okay, so there's 2 men in the woods, and they're looking for something, obviously. I kept thinking it must have been their dog, and they must have lost their dog. And then I thought that they would try to sneak up on it. I stood there frozen because that's the kind of person I am. I could hear them getting closer to me. And I don't know how long I stood there just waiting for them to get to me, but I was completely frozen. And then I heard the other voice. It was distorted. Like if you heard someone talking through a closed door or talking underwater. You could understand what they were saying, but the voice wasn't right. It wasn't in my head because it had a volume and a pitch that changed, that my thoughts would definitely not do. I could almost feel where it was coming from. It was behind me and a little above, and it was taller than me. It just said, "Go to the river now." I don't know if I was more scared of the fact that there's some disembodied voice or person talking to me, or that there are 2 men in the woods. I listened to the voice because I didn't really have any other options. I took off towards the river. I made a ton of noise, because I was just going as fast as I could, and the voice came back and said, "No, quietly." I got into the river and jumped down the embankment, squished myself against it, squeezing down the smallest, tightest ball I could. The voice kept telling me to stay, and I just sat there, hoping whatever was in the woods was going to leave, and that I wasn't having some kind of mental breakdown. And I kept hearing them moving through the woods, and I could tell that they had split up. As I sat there, the voice just kept telling me to stay quiet over and over again, like he was trying to comfort me. I could hear what sounded like someone getting right above me, and if I leaned out, they could see me. But I had to look. I just tilted my head up a tiny bit, and I could see the tips of these construction boots hanging over the edge. And I could see hanging next to them this dirty old rope, just swinging. I don't even think I thought anything. I was just so scared. I just tried to breathe. It felt like hours, but I know it couldn't have been very long. The voice was completely silent. There was nothing but me hearing this man breathing. He started to walk away at some point, and the voice kept telling me to wait, so I waited. And finally the voice said, "Go, now, onto the field, go." It was screaming at me so loud. I ran through the woods and just got out of there to the field, far, far from the cars in the street. It was getting dark, and I could see the parking lot, but it was so far away. I'm running, and I start to hear footsteps running, and first they're farther away, but then they're much faster than I am, and they start catching up on me. And then there was nothing. I fully expected to see at least one of the two men, but it was just silent. The only thing I could think of was that the footsteps must have belonged to the voice. And I hear it again screaming at the top of its lungs that it needed to run right now. And the footsteps came back, and they're in pace with me, running next to me through the field. I had 1,000 crazy thoughts because none of this made any sense. Finally, I get to my car and see that both the cars were parked in different places with nobody in them. I refused to look behind me. If there hadn't been a voice, I probably would be a missing persons case. Thankfully, whatever that guardian angel was, it got me out of there. During August of 2018, my friends and I took a road trip from New York City to Rhode Island. None of us had been to Rhode Island before, so we were excited about the drive, especially because we had rented a Mustang convertible for it. We left a little later than expected. It was about 10:30 p.m., and since it was a busy Friday night, we decided to punch our destination into the Waze traffic app to beat the traffic. Eventually, we started losing steam, so my friend in the back seat fell asleep, and I just drove along quietly. My friend in the passenger seat told me to exit the freeway and take the side road. At first, driving on the unlit, winding back roads was relaxing, but then the wind picked up and it got increasingly foggy and misty. I wasn't scared, per se, just a little on edge. I thought about pulling over to put the top up, but then realized against it since there was no cars in sight. Heavy rain was projected for the entire weekend, so I wanted to get the most out of the convertible. So I kept going, along as normal, if not a little too fast, to get back on the main roads as quickly as possible when something just shifted. I don't know how to explain it other than an unsettling, exposed feeling. I remember pulling my sweater over my legs to cover up. Then my friend in front of me told me to look at the street sign in the distance. It read Purgatory. We woke up our friend in the back seat, who sort of scoffed. Seconds later, we went around a bend where there was a large red cross installed on the side of the road with nothing else in sight. We just shrugged it off as creepy coincidence. By then, we were kind of joking and indulging the spookiness, but then around the next bend, a big truck came hurtling down the one-lane road, aimed straight at us. Luckily, my impulse was to swerve a little to the side, otherwise it probably would have resulted in a head-on collision. My friend tried to get his license plate number, but he sped off, while my other friend found the quickest route away from this particular road. We didn't really discuss what happened afterward because we were too creeped out, and we haven't talked about it since. While writing this story, I decided to look it up. I spent an hour trying to retrace our route and found the little road. It was indeed named Purgatory, although we didn't notice it at the time. Google Maps revealed Purgatory Road was situated next to an old graveyard. Curious about this road, I researched it further and discovered that 2 teen girls had died there in August of 2011 in an accident on their way to visit the grave of the Rhode Island's infamous vampire, Mercy Brown, who died in 1892. Apparently, they had decided to go for a drive down this dark, windy road because they thought it was haunted. I didn't grow up believing in ghosts. Then one morning when I was 16, my friend's mom picked us up for carpool. I mentioned that I was really creeped out by this bathroom under the stairs of my house that no one ever used. I couldn't exactly define why I felt this way. I just found it eerie. The house I grew up in was an old Victorian home built in the 1800s, so eerie vibes were part of the package. Hearing this reminded my friend of her own creepy bathroom association. She told me that when she lived in the German countryside for a year, there was a little section of the home that no one but her middle sister used, who was about 9 years old at the time. During this time period, her sister would wake up with bloodshot eyes, sometimes even bruises, and feel totally exhausted. They did everything to investigate what was going on, including sleeping in her room, working with a child psychiatrist, and a school counselor. My friend doesn't remember much from this time period, other than her sister being disturbed by something that year they lived there. She mentioned that she and her other sister, the oldest, also hated using that bathroom because they would always feel off and find thick black hair stuck to the drain, even though none of them had black hair. At this point in the story, my friend's mom abruptly stopped the car and jerked her head around and said, "That's where the old woman once lived and killed herself. She drowned herself in that bathtub." Her mom was clearly shaken. She said it's part of the reason they moved. It was because something felt off in the house. Thank you for listening. As always, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Have a good night.